In this video, we're going to discuss the endocrine system, which allows different parts of our body to communicate with each other. You might notice this is basically the same job as the nervous system, which it kind of is, but there are lots of differences between the two, and we'll explore these as we go through the video. The endocrine system consists of a series of glands that are found throughout the body. What they have in common is that they all secrete hormones, which are small chemical molecules that are passed into the blood and then spread throughout the body in the bloodstream. This allows the hormones to come into contact with a wide range of tissues. Some of these tissues, and it's important that it's only some of these tissues, not all of them, will have receptors that are specific to the hormones. And so the hormone molecules can act as signals to trigger certain changes inside the cells. We'll see some of these glands in more detail in other videos, but for now, let's look at the main glands in the system and see briefly what they do. First, we have the pituitary gland, which is sometimes called the master gland. It produces multiple different hormones, some of which directly tell the body what to do, and some which tell other glands to release their own hormones. It's not actually part of the brain, but it's pretty close, and it is attached to the brain. Down in our neck, we have the thyroid gland, which produces the hormone thyroxine. This regulates the rate of our metabolism, and also plays an important role in growth and development. Now, do you remember how earlier we said that the pituitary gland releases hormones that influence other glands? Well, an example of this is thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. If the pituitary gland detects low levels of thyroxine, then it will release TSH, which stimulates the thyroid to produce more thyroxine, which will bring the level of thyroxine back up to normal. Remember, we call this process negative feedback, because if thyroxine levels are too low, they're stimulated to rise again, and if they went too high, they'd be brought back down. Sitting just on top of our kidneys, we have our adrenal glands that produce adrenaline. This is normally released during the fight or flight response, when we're startled or scared. It basically gets us ready to fight or run by doing things like increasing our heart rates and generally getting our blood pumping faster. Just in front of the kidneys, we have the pancreas. The pancreas produces the hormone insulin. And as we'll see in the next video, this helps us to regulate our blood glucose concentrations, which just means the amount of sugar in our bloodstream. The last two glands that we need to talk about are the testes and the ovaries. And these are both going to come up again in our video on the menstrual cycle. The testes are only found in males, and they have two main jobs: producing the hormone testosterone, which controls puberty, and producing the male gametes, sperm, for reproduction. The ovaries, meanwhile, are found only in females. Their main role is to produce estrogen, which influences puberty and the menstrual cycle. They also hold the female gametes, egg cells. Now lastly, we need to know how the endocrine system differs from the nervous system. First, we have the fact that one relies on hormones, which are small molecules secreted by glands and transported in the blood, while the other relies mainly on electrical impulses, which are transferred along nerve cells. This means that hormones spread more slowly and their effects last longer, whereas nerve impulses are sent very fast and the effects don't last very long, often less than a second. The other point is that hormones act more generally. As we said earlier, they spread through the entire body, which means that they interact with loads of different cells. In contrast, nerve impulses are sent to one specific area, such as the particular muscle that we need to move our arm. So we often describe the nervous system as being precise. And that's all we have to say about the endocrine system. So if you enjoyed it, then please do give us a like, and we'll see you next time.
Hormonal communication generally begins with a part of the neuroendocrine system receiving sensory information and reacting by issuing a command to the body in the form of a hormone. In this example, dehydration is detected by osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, which then directs or stimulates the posterior pituitary gland to release antidiuretic hormone, ADH. The next step is to transport the hormone molecules to target cells. This is typically done via the bloodstream. Here, ADH is transported through the bloodstream to the kidneys and blood vessels. When hormone molecules reach target cells, they will bind to matching receptors on those cells, and the hormone receptor complexes will trigger changes in the target cells. This causes the kidneys to reduce the urine volume output, thereby increasing water retention and countering dehydration. In blood vessels, vasoconstriction is increased, leading to higher blood pressure and thus countering the blood pressure drop caused by dehydration.
The endocrine system is a very important and very involved system within our bodies. It allows our body to communicate over long distances and is a major player in regulating a stable environment, or in other words, preserving homeostasis. This system employs the use of hormones, which are chemicals secreted from glands and enter the bloodstream where they circulate until exerting an effect on a downstream target cell. We are going to be specifically talking about the two types of mechanisms in which hormones exert their effect on target cells. But to start off, here is a brief overview of what hormones are and how they work. There are three basic groups of hormones. 1. Amino acid derivatives. 2. Peptide hormones. And 3. Lipid derivatives or steroid hormones. For amino acid derivatives, these are small molecules and they come from amino acids like tyrosine and tryptophan. One hormone derived from tryptophan is melatonin, a hormone involved in our sleep-wake cycles. You can get tryptophan from foods like turkey, chocolate, or milk. Peptide hormones are made up of a bunch of amino acids. Some examples would be thyroid-stimulating hormone, oxytocin, or prolactin. Lipid derivatives, or steroid hormones, are considered lipophilic, meaning they have an affinity for lipid structures, which we'll take a look at shortly. They circulate in the blood bound to carrier proteins, so they usually last in the circulation longer than other types of hormones. There are two main mechanisms for which a hormone can affect a target cell. The first is by a non-steroid action. This mechanism is employed by an amino acid hormone or a peptide hormone. These hormones cannot freely cross a membrane on a target cell, so it first acts by binding a cell surface receptor. There is then an intracellular signaling cascade that occurs in order for the desired effect to take place. There are proteins on the intracellular side of the target cell that are associated with the receptor. Most often, this involves what's called a G protein. This G protein is found next to an enzyme that converts ATP to a molecule called cyclic AMP, or CAMP. This is something that makes this mechanism unique. Cyclic AMP is called a second messenger because it signals a cascade of events that eventually change the enzymatic activity in a cell to cause the target cell response. Examples of hormones that use the cyclic AMP second messenger system include ACTH, calcitonin, epinephrine, glucagon, parathyroid hormone, and ADH. The second mechanism is the steroid action. Because lipid derivative or steroid hormones are lipophilic, they can freely move through the membrane and into the cell. From there, they can either bind to a receptor within the cell, or they can move freely into the nucleus, where the hormone, or hormone complex, causes a change in gene activity. This then increases transcription and mRNA production, which then leads to an increase in protein production within the cell. Examples of hormones that exert effects via steroid hormone mechanisms are testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, aldosterone, and calcitriol.
Hey guys, and welcome to today's video. We will talk about a variety of cell signaling possibilities, cell communication, and about different cell signaling types. Here we start off with paracrine signaling. The blue cell can release growth factors, for example, and all the surrounded cells here with the expression of specific receptors can now bind this ligand. This can then activate intracellular signaling, for example, some downstream effects like gene transcription activation. However, cells in the near surrounding with no expression of this receptor, they cannot be targeted for communication. It is important to mention here that for paracrine signaling, the cells have to be in rather close range. The signaling molecules released by the donor cell here, they can't travel over a long distance. An example for paracrine signaling might be the expression of VEGF, so the vascular endothelial growth factor. They are secreted and the surrounding cells with the specific receptors can then initiate angiogenesis. Another signaling type here is the autocrine signaling. So in this case here, the cell can secrete a messenger, which can be a hormone, for example, and this one can bind to its own receptors on the surface. In that case, the cell has expressed the fitting receptor for its own secreted signaling molecule. We can find many good examples for autocrine signaling when we have a look into tumor cells. Most tumor cells show to be autonomous in terms of cell proliferation. Many of them show to develop independency of their microenvironment. This is why autocrine signaling is found a lot in tumor cells. Another form of cell communication is juxtacrine signaling. In this case, it's all dependent on contact. So in this case, we don't have the secretion of a signaling molecule. Instead, we have a membrane-bound signaling molecule on our donor cell. The juxtacrine signaling is contact dependent. So when the cells get into close proximity and the membrane-bound signaling molecule will interact with the receptor on the target cell, cell signaling can be triggered. A very famous example for juxtacrine signaling is the Notch delta pathway. So two adjacent cells where one has expressed the delta molecule, which is the membrane-bound ligand, and the other cell has expressed the Notch receptors. Notch delta signaling is involved in embryogenesis. It is very important for cell differentiation and can easily determine cell fate dependent on which one of these parts, the receptor or the ligand, is expressed. When cells have to communicate but are in very large distance, so paracrine signaling is not possible because of limited diffusion. Let's make it more specific. We take different organs. The brain, for example, can secrete a hormone, but the target site, so the receptors, are located in the liver tissue. So these are two organs where we have quite some range in between, right? In this case, there's one type of signaling which is called endocrine signaling, where the donor cell will now secrete their signaling molecules into the circulatory system, and they will travel in the bloodstream. They can diffuse through the membranes once they reach their specific target cell to trigger intracellular signaling pathways. The secretion of hormones is a very good example here. Hormone synthesis takes place in glands. One example might be insulin. Insulin is produced in the pancreas and from there secreted into the bloodstream. The endocrine system helps insulin to travel over a long distance and reach muscle cells, for example, where insulin can bind to insulin receptors that support the uptake of sugars in the tissue. The last type of signaling I want to show you is synaptic signaling. In this case, we are talking about neurons and neurotransmitters. The upper part here is the terminal axon. It's also called the presynaptic neuron. The part on the other side is called the postsynaptic neuron, and in between we have the synaptic cleft. Our presynaptic neuron has neurotransmitters. So these neurotransmitters here are released into the synapse. So in this case, the neurotransmitter can bind to the receptors expressed on the postsynaptic neuron, And this binding of the neurotransmitters can open and close channels. Open channels can lead to ion flows, such as the rapid uptake of calcium. Overall, a cell has different ways to communicate, and cellular communication is very complex. There is a whole variety. A cell can communicate in their local environment. It can also initiate its own cellular signaling pathway. When cellular communication takes place over a long distance, the endocrine signaling is a possibility using the circulatory system as a highway. There is contact-dependent signaling, and when we talk about neurons, there is also synaptic signaling, where neurotransmitters play a role, which are released and bind to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron to initiate signal transduction. And with that, I thank you very much for watching. I hope this video was helpful for you, and see you next time.
The basic units of this system are special kinds of glands. Unlike other glands, endocrine glands secrete their products, called hormones, directly into the bloodstream. The powerful hormones travel everywhere in the body, influencing every aspect of life in very specific ways. Many parts of the body secrete hormones, but 6 major types of glands are of particular importance to adults. They are the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, the thyroid and parathyroids, the adrenals, the gonads, and in the head, the pituitary. Every major endocrine gland is a highly structured organ. Throughout each run the smallest blood vessels, capillaries. Hormones are secreted into the capillaries. Through a microscope, it is possible to see red blood cells as they move through the capillaries and veins. Hormones, however, are not actually visible. They are in solution in the blood plasma, just as salt is in solution in seawater and is invisible. The hormones enter the general circulation. Eventually, they filter back to the capillaries elsewhere in the body. Unlike the red blood cells, hormones travel freely through the capillary walls. Though they travel everywhere in the body, hormones only influence specific target cells. A hormone may have relatively few targets, affecting only a few kinds of cells. A different hormone may affect nearly every cell in the body. Every target cell has a chemical receptor, which the hormone specifically fits, as a key specifically fits a lock. The receptor may be on the surface of the cell or inside it. A cell that is not a target for a particular hormone has no receptors for it and is not affected by it.
One of the major characteristics of the endocrine system is that its products, which are hormones, travel through the bloodstream to get to their target cells. Blood is comprised of cells and plasma, and the plasma is over 90% water. Many hormones, like monoamines and peptides, are hydrophilic. This means they are water-soluble, so traveling through the blood plasma is not a problem for them. However, steroid and thyroid hormones are hydrophobic. This means that they are lipid-soluble and have difficulty traveling through the watery blood plasma. This does present a bit of a problem, and the solution is in the liver. The liver synthesizes albumins and globulins called transport proteins. These transport proteins are not only water-soluble, but they bind to lipid-soluble hormones to create a complex that is also water-soluble. This allows the hormone to be carried through the blood to its target cell. A hormone attached to a transport protein is called a bound hormone, and one that is not attached is an unbound or free hormone. Only the unbound hormones can leave a blood capillary and get to a target cell, and the percentage of a hormone that is unbound at any given time is called its free fraction. Another benefit of transport proteins is that they protect hormones from being broken down by enzymes in the blood plasma and liver, and from being filtered out of the blood by the kidneys. So therefore, transport proteins prolong the half-life of circulating hormones and allow them to linger in the bloodstream longer. Free hormones may be broken down or removed from the blood in minutes, whereas bound hormones can circulate for hours or even weeks.
You've heard the saying, love at first sight, right? Well, what about love at first scent? Maybe some of you out there have been thinking about buying some pheromones to put you on the fast track to romance. Before we get into whether or not that's a good idea, let's take a look at what pheromones are and if these things can actually affect the way we think. Entomologists first identified pheromones in 1959 as chemical substances that were used by insects to cause certain behavioral reactions in their peers. In other words, they were a pretty impressive form of chemical communication in the animal kingdom. As research developed, pheromones were identified in all walks of life, including human beings. However, studying pheromones in insects is a cakewalk compared to humans because we are far more complex creatures. There's also many kinds of pheromones out there. So let's focus on the pheromones called releasers, the ones that involve sexual attraction. Every individual lives in their own sensory world, and this is the main reason why studying pheromones is extremely difficult. Personal history or even the context of a perceived smell can affect an individual's response to it. For example, you might like the smell of gasoline because your dad was a mechanic. Someone else might hate it because they're in a car accident. Also, there isn't a standard setup for everyone's olfactory system, so each person has a different set of chemical sensors in their nose. Scientists haven't been able to isolate releasers in humans yet, and it very well could be due to these complications. So, if there aren't any isolated human releasers yet, what the heck are they putting on those love potions you buy online? Most of them contain trace amounts of these three volatile compounds. And believe it or not, folks, these are in fact real releasers, and they do work wonders, but only if you're a pig. And no, I'm not saying to put the pheromones on and act like a pig. I'm saying that these are compounds that have been isolated in pigs. So if you're feeling suave and dabbed a little bit of this stuff on your wrists, stay away from the farm. It's for your own good. Now you might be wondering, is there any legitimacy about these store-bought releasers, or is it all just one big cruel joke played on people starving for romance? Science has proven the existence and the effectiveness of these pheromones in pigs, yet a lot of the manufacturers of these pheromones claim that they work on humans through the use of a specialized chemical sensing tool called the vomeronasal organ. Well, folks, it doesn't look like they've done their research because the vomeronasal organ is basically just a shell in humans and isn't even wired to our brains. And on top of that, the chemical pheromones in their products aren't even detected by the vomeronasal organs of pigs. So we're pretty much left in the dark when it comes to lust-inspiring pig smells. So for all you out there looking for a quick path to romance, sorry to burst your bubble, but you're gonna have to do it the old-fashioned way. But you can try using some of your newly gained chemistry knowledge to drive the guys or gals wild. And thanks for watching. On the topic of chemical communication, make sure to watch this video on why dogs smell each other's butts, or maybe learn why garlic gives you bad breath with this video. And while you're still here, make sure to check out ACS Webinars YouTube page. It's got tons of great content. Just click this button on the screen right here and it'll send you right there. And don't forget to subscribe.
In this segment, we will learn how thyroid hormone is synthesized and secreted, and how that synthesis and secretion can be turned off. So let's begin with the hypothalamus. These neurosecretory neurons will synthesize and secrete hormones, and these hormones can travel to the anterior pituitary. In this case, with the thyroid hormone feedback loop, the neurosecretory neurons will synthesize and secrete a hormone called thyrotropin-releasing hormone. Thyrotropin-releasing hormone is abbreviated TRH. Once the neurosecretory neurons synthesize and secrete thyrotropin-releasing hormone, it will travel down the axon of the neurosecretory neuron and into the axon terminal. From the axon terminal, thyrotropin-releasing hormone will be released. Once thyrotropin-releasing hormone is secreted from the axon terminal, it will enter into the hypophyseal portal system. This hypophyseal portal system is basically a bridge between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, specifically the anterior pituitary. So thyrotropin-releasing hormone will travel through the hypophyseal portal system, this capillary bed, and into the anterior pituitary. Once TRH reaches the anterior pituitary, it will stimulate, or it will bind to, in other words, to receptors on the endocrine cells within the anterior pituitary. So once thyrotropin-releasing hormone binds to these receptors on the endocrine cells in the anterior pituitary, that will stimulate the endocrine cells of the anterior pituitary to synthesize and secrete another hormone called thyroid-stimulating hormone. So once the endocrine cells have synthesized and secreted thyroid-stimulating hormone, it will enter into circulation. And this is the systemic circulation. And it's a hormone, so we know hormones enter into the bloodstream. So once thyroid-stimulating hormone enters circulation, it is going to target the cells of the thyroid gland. So once TSH targets the thyroid gland and targets those cells, it will bind to receptors. And once it binds to those receptors, it's going to promote the synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormone, TH. One of the things about thyroid hormone, there are actually two types. There's a T3 and a T4 that are actually synthesized and secreted by the thyroid gland. So we have T3 and T4. For the purposes of our class, we're going to refer to both T3 and T4 as thyroid hormone. But let me just briefly explain the difference between the two. T3 is called triiodothyronine because it contains 3 iodides. T4 is called thyroxine because it contains 4 iodide molecules. T4 is more prevalent than T3, but it has a weaker effect. T3, on the other hand, is scarcer, but 4 times more potent. So both T3 and T4 wind up in circulation, in the systemic circulation. When T4 winds up into the systemic circulation, it gets converted to T3. And so T3 then will go off and will target various tissues. So we have our thyroid hormone that's in circulation, and the thyroid hormone does a number of things. One of the things that thyroid hormone can do is it can increase the number of mitochondria within the cells. Thyroid hormone can also target many different tissues. And when it targets these tissues, what it's doing is controlling the rate of cellular respiration. So in other words, controlling the rate of metabolism. So we're controlling the rate of cellular respiration. And this is going to be dependent upon what the body's needs are. Now, throughout the body, thyroid hormone can also increase the rate of your sodium potassium ATPase. If you remember, that is the sodium potassium pump. So if I increase the rate of my sodium potassium pump, that means I'm going to increase the rate at which I hydrolyze ATP. So all of these then contribute to increasing your basal metabolic rate. And if I increase the number of chemical reactions within the body, my body is generating heat. So we generate heat as a product of increasing our basal metabolic rate. So what this means then is we're creating a need for more ATP. So to do that, I am going to need to mobilize the energy stores. Now, when thyroid hormone functions to mobilize those energy stores, thyroid hormone is at a slightly higher concentration than it normally would be. So thyroid hormone will target the liver. Thyroid hormone will target skeletal muscle. And when it targets the liver and the skeletal muscle, that thyroid hormone will cause glycogenolysis. And as a result of glycogenolysis, my plasma glucose level will increase. Now, thyroid hormone can also target adipose tissue. And when it targets adipose tissue, that's going to stimulate lipolysis. And as a result of breaking down a triglyceride, that's going to increase our fatty acid plasma level. And it will also ultimately increase the glucose plasma level as well. Now, thyroid hormone can also target skeletal muscle and cause proteolysis. And when we break down muscle via proteolysis, then we're going to be releasing amino acids. So as a result, the body will also increase the plasma level of amino acids. All of these then can be used as substrates for cellular respiration. And because they're used as substrates for cellular respiration, there is no net effect of your glucose level in the plasma. So we've discovered then with thyroid hormone function is the big picture is that it contributes to growth and development. It also maintains a balance between your catabolic and your anabolic reactions. So we're going to be using negative feedback to turn off thyroid hormone synthesis and secretion. If we start with thyroid hormone again, that's in the circulation, thyroid hormone can have an inhibitory effect on the anterior pituitary. So when it has this effect on the anterior pituitary, it's inhibiting the responsiveness to thyrotropin releasing hormone. Now, thyroid hormone can also have an inhibitory effect on the hypothalamus. And when it binds to receptors within the hypothalamus, it will inhibit the synthesis and secretion of thyrotropin releasing hormone.
Bovine growth hormone. What is bovine growth hormone? Recombinant bovine growth hormone, or RBGH, is a genetically engineered version of the growth hormone that is found in dairy cattle. The naturally occurring growth hormone is known as bovine somatotropin and is produced in the pituitary gland of the cow. Normally, bovine somatotropin is produced in small quantities and is used to regulate metabolic processes, which means that it helps the cow to do things like grow properly and produce milk. In the 1970s, a biotech company called Genentech discovered and patented the gene that is associated with the production of bovine growth hormone. They used DNA technology to make an artificial version of the hormone, which is now known as recombinant bovine growth hormone, because it is artificially formed. RBGH is used by dairy farmers to increase milk production in cows. How does this work? First, the hormone is implanted behind the ear of a cow. Or injected into its food. Once it is in the bloodstream, RBGH acts like the natural growth hormone in cows and increases something called insulin-like growth factor 1. This stimulates milk-producing organs in the cow and causes the cow to produce more milk. Because RBGH is not produced naturally, it causes the cow to produce more milk than it is normally capable of producing. This can have negative effects on the cow. Sources of exposure. Recombinant bovine growth hormone is injected into dairy cattle, which means that if you drink milk, you are at risk of consuming the hormone. However, as of the year 2000, the use of RBGH has been banned in Canada, although it is still widely used in the United States. Risks of using RBGH. A big concern with using RBGH is that the hormone increases insulin-like growth factor 1, which causes cells to grow and has been linked to the development of tumors. A study by the Food and Drug Administration found that adults who drink milk have about 10% higher levels of insulin-like growth factor 1 in their blood than those who drink little or no milk. However, they also found the same levels in people who drink soy milk, so the study was inconclusive. Right now, the health implications for humans who consume RBGH are unknown. The biggest issue with using RBGH is the effect that it has on the dairy cattle. Because the cows produce so much excess milk, they need to be milked more often than normal. This can cause them to develop an udder infection known as mastitis. In 1991, a report by rural Vermont found that cows injected with RBGH had a significantly higher chance of giving birth to deformed calves, implying that RBGH affects the reproductive system. However, no studies have linked RBGH to human birth defects. Benefits of using RBGH. When RBGH is used properly, it can help to increase milk production in cows. This has many benefits because it means that dairy farmers can use less cows to produce the milk that they need. This decreases the environmental impact of dairy farming. Most importantly, when RBGH is used on dairy cattle, it does not affect the variability composition in milk. This means that the milk that the RBGH cows produce is identical to non-RBGH milk. Also, there have been no proven negative effects on humans. A lot of anti-milk groups claim that RBGH is directly linked to cancer. This is a myth. In fact, there have been no conclusive studies that have suggested that RBGH can hurt people in any way. Should RBGH be banned?
Life can present stressful situations, like being chased by a man-eating tiger. And when we experience stress, there are symptoms. Maybe we get a headache or a churning stomach. We might snap at our kids or cry more easily. We might think negative or depressing thoughts or get tunnel vision. These symptoms tell us that something is happening in our bodies. What is going on? When there is a perceived danger, our bodies release a surge of hormones, a normal physical response to stress, which helps us prepare to take action. These hormones can cause our heart rate to increase, respiration to increase, blood pressure to rise, blood sugars to rise, digestion to slow down, blood to rush to our muscles. At one time, these responses helped us survive. When being chased by tigers, we needed to be able to fight back or run away. Luckily, nowadays, most of us are not surrounded by those kinds of dangers. The problem is, our bodies still respond as if we are. Our nervous systems aren't very good at knowing the difference between emotional and physical threats. Whether you're stressed over a mountain of bills or a fierce tiger, your body can react in the same way. And the more our stress response is activated, the more easily it gets turned on, and the harder it is to shut off. This is not good. Over time, the increased hormone levels from chronic stress can cause harmful changes to occur in our bodies. These changes can lead to all kinds of bad things like heart disease, sleep problems, digestive problems, depression, obesity, memory problems. It's not a pretty picture, is it? But we don't have to get all stressed out over it. The risks of stress can be offset by learning to handle stress in healthy ways. First, we pay attention to our sources of stress and learn to notice our stress symptoms, physical sensations, thoughts, and feelings. Then we practice simple strategies to interrupt the stress response. Whether our stress comes from major life events or everyday hassles, when we feel stressed, it's for a reason. It's not helpful to blame ourselves or to ignore our stress. What helps is to recognize and accept the feeling, and then take steps to respond in helpful ways.